The Timex had stopped working 3 years after Danny died. Boone had never replaced the battery. He kept it in the left breast pocket of his cut right against his ribs, where he could feel it when he breathed. Not a reminder, not a ritual, just weight. The specific, irreplaceable weight of something that had once belonged to someone who no longer needed it. He had been riding for 11 hours. The desert outside Harlan's diner was the color of old bone in the dark flat, and enormous and indifferent to everything happening inside its edges. The storm had come in from the northwest around sundown, the kind that moved sideways and made the air smell like copper and wet sage. By the time Boone pulled off Route 89, and under the awning rain was sheeting across the highway in long gray curtains that swallowed the far lane entirely, he sat on the bike for a moment after cutting the engine, just sat there. The rain on the awning above him made a sound like a crowd settling, like something about to begin. He had been coming out this way every year for 8 years now, riding alone, stopping nowhere in particular, eating when he remembered to eat. Not because the road helped. It did not help. But because being in motion was the closest he could come to feeling like he had somewhere to be. Danny had been 19 years old. Boone had been 43, sitting in a cell in Florence, Arizona, 14 months into a stretch he had taken on behalf of a brother who had 3 kids, and a wife who was sick and no viable future if he went away. It was not a decision Boone had spent a lot of time weighing. He had simply said yes and then lived in the consequences of that yes for the better part of 2 years. He had come out to a world that had kept moving without him. Danny was buried in a cemetery outside Tucson, in a plot his aunt had arranged because there was no one else to do it. The stone was simple. The dates were correct. The space between them was 19 years long, which was the entirety of a life that Boone had not been present for at the end of. Nobody had called because Boone had not had a phone in lockup. By the time he found out, it had been 3 months. 3 months of Danny already being in the ground, while Boone made his bunk and ate his meals and counted days toward a release that no longer had the shape he had given it. He never talked about this, not to the chapter, not to anyone. He just rode on this day every year and kept the watch in his pocket and let the road do whatever the road was gonna do. He climbed off the bike. The diner was called Harlan's, which was the name of no one currently associated with the place. It was a single-story building wedged between the highway and a gravel lot with a neon sign above the door that glowed more orange than red and made a sound like a sustained complaint. The windows were fogged from the inside. Through the fog, the shapes of people. Boone pulled his cut straight, wiped the rain off his face with the back of his hand, and pushed through the door. The bell above it chimed once. Then the room changed. It was the same change every room made. Not dramatic, not sudden. A ripple moving outward from the door like a stone dropped in still water. The couple in the far booth lowered their voices. The teenager at the counter turned on his stool with the quick, automatic motion of someone who had been startled without being willing to admit it. The waitress behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair, looked up from the order she was writing and went still for exactly 1 second before her face rearranged itself into something professionally neutral. Boone had stopped registering these reactions years ago. They were noise, background information, the world deciding what it thought of him before he had opened his mouth or taken a step. He had learned not to argue with it. He had also learned not to shrink from it. He simply moved through it the way you move through weather. You could not reason with weather. You could only dress for it. He took the stool at the far end of the counter. There were 8 other people in the room. He counted them without appearing to. It was an old habit, older than the cut, older than the road. Two truckers at the window table, both with phones. The couple in the booth. The teenager. A man alone near the back eating a plate of something he was not paying attention to. And one more. An old woman at a corner table alone. She had a bowl of soup in front of her that she had not touched. Her hands were in her lap. Her back was straight in a way that went beyond posture. The straightness of a person who had decided long ago that the world would not see her slump, and had made that decision so many times. It had become simply who she was. Boone looked at her for a moment longer than he looked at the others. Then he looked away and waited for the waitress. She came over with a coffee pot. Her name tag said Norma. Her hand did not shake when she poured, which he noted because it usually did the first pour, always the hand giving away what the face had been trained to hide. "Just coffee," he said. "And whatever pie you have, apple or peach apple." She left. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the counter. The rain hit the roof in waves rising and falling with the wind. The coffee was hot and bitter and real, and he drank it slowly and let the warmth work down through 11 hours of road. He was most of the way through the pie when he felt it. Not a sound, not a movement. The specific feeling of being approached by someone who had made a decision they were frightened of. He had felt it before in various contexts, in rooms where the decision being made could go badly, and in rooms where the decision was simply courage encountering its own uncertainty. He could tell the difference. He had learned to read it the way you read a road at night, by the absence of things rather than their presence. He did not turn immediately. He lifted his mug, took a slow sip, waited. The footsteps stopped directly behind him. Then the whisper. "Please, pretend you're my grandson." 7 words, small enough to be swallowed by the noise of the storm. But he heard every syllable. And when he set the mug down and turned slowly the way a man turns when he wants to see something clearly, without telegraphing that he is looking what he saw, stopped something in him. She was standing less than 2 feet away, 89 years old if he had to guess. White hair damp at the edges where the rain had caught her before she came inside. Hands clasped in front of her chest, with the careful deliberateness of someone who needed them held still. The kind of woman who had spent decades running a household, or a classroom, or a desk. Someone whose spine had been built by decades of standing straight when other things wanted to bend. But it was her eyes. Her eyes were not confused. They were not lost. They were not the eyes of an old woman who had wandered in out of the storm and didn't know where she was. They were sharp and steady and completely, entirely terrified. And the terror in them had a quality that Boone recognized. It was the terror of someone who has already calculated every other option and found them all closed. She had come to him because there was no one else left to come to. "Please," she said again, barely a breath. "I know how this sounds. I know what you must think of me. But I don't have time to explain everything, and I need you to trust me. And I need you to say yes right now." Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her at the room, the truckers at the window, the couple in the booth, the teenager with his back turned, the man eating without tasting his food, Norma behind the counter pouring coffee for someone without meeting anyone's eyes. Nothing obvious. He looked back at the old woman. "You're scared," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Of something in here." "Not yet." She glanced toward the door. Her eyes moved fast and came back faster. Just for a second, but soon. "Who?" Her lips pressed together. Her clasped hands tightened. I can't say it out loud. Not here. Not yet. Please. I know you have no reason to help me. I know how you look, and I know how other people look at you. And I am not other people. I am an old woman who has made very few mistakes in her life. And I am asking you, please. Boone had been asked a lot of things in his life. He had been asked to fight and to run and to carry weight that was not technically his to carry. He had been asked to be loyal and to be silent, and to take the consequences of decisions made by other people. No one had ever asked him like this, not with that specific combination of dignity and desperation held together in the same breath. Neither one canceling out the other, both of them completely real. He looked at her for one more second. Then he turned back to the counter, picked up his coffee mug, and said it loud enough for the room to hear. Grandma, I told you to wait in the car. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then, the woman behind him exhaled. Long and slow and trembling, the breath of someone who had been holding it far longer than they should have, and she pulled out the stool beside him and sat down. Her posture remained perfect even as her hands still clasped. Finally came to rest on the edge of the counter. Norma appeared. Her expression could not quite decide what it was. Get you anything, hon? Tea, the woman said. Hot with lemon if you have it. Sure thing. When Norma left, Boone kept his eyes on the counter and spoke without moving his lips. Much the sound pitched precisely to carry to the woman beside him, and no further. 60 seconds before I need more than I'm scared. Talk. The woman's name he would learn later was Ruth Callahan, but that was later. Right now, she was folding her hands on the counter with her spine absolutely straight and beginning to speak in a voice that was low and steady and gave nothing away. They have been following me since Flagstaff, she said. How many? The car I've seen. Black, large, an SUV. 2 men inside that I could count. She paused. There may be more. How long? 2 days. 2 days. He turned that over without showing it on his face. In his peripheral vision, he could see the rain against the window and the darkness beyond it and the gravel lot where 3 or 4 cars sat. None of them the black SUV she was describing. Not yet. Why, he said, the sound that came from her then was not a sigh. It was the controlled release of something much heavier than a sigh. Pressed down into that single quiet exhalation. As if she had been carrying the answer to that question for a very long time, and was now finally about to set it down. My husband, she said. His name was Edwin. Edwin Callahan. He worked for 31 years as a senior auditor for Maricopa County. She stopped. Her jaw moved slightly. The small movement of someone deciding how much of a thing to say at once, and then deciding to say all of it. In his last year, he found something he was not supposed to find. Numbers that did not add up. Money being moved in ways that money should not be moved. Boone said nothing. He was not a reckless man, Edwin. Ruth's voice remained perfectly level, and somehow that steadiness made it worse. He was methodical, careful. He spent 8 months verifying what he had found before he said a single word about it to anyone. 8 months of working alone, double-checking everything, making sure there was no other explanation. What did he find? $14 million, she said. Moved over 6 years in pieces small enough to avoid automatic flags. Shell companies. Contracts awarded to businesses that existed only on paper. grants approved for construction projects that were never built. She looked at the surface of her tea. The money traced to 3 individuals. 2 of them are names that most people in this state would recognize. Politicians. And the third holds a position that makes him difficult to touch, even with evidence. She set her mug down with a small, precise movement. Edwin went to a colleague first, a man he had worked alongside for 20 years. He believed the man was trustworthy. What happened? She was quiet for a moment. The rain against the roof rose and fell. Edwin was dead 11 weeks later, she said. The official cause was a heart attack. Boone said nothing. He had never had a single problem with his heart, Ruth said. Not one day in his life. The front door of the diner opened, not dramatically, not with a bang or a gust, just the soft sound of a glass door. Pushed against its pneumatic resistance the momentary breath of wet outside air. And then the door settling closed. Boone did not turn. He watched Ruth's face instead. He watched the precise moment when what was in her eyes shifted from frightened to something colder, something that had moved past fear and into a kind of grim recognition. He's here, she said, very quietly. Don't look yet, Boone said. Tell me what he looks like. Tall, 50, maybe 55. Dark suit, brown hair going gray at the temples. She stopped. He'll be smiling when he comes in. He always smiles, even when he shouldn't. Boone picked up his coffee mug. He turned on his stool in the slow, easy way of a man stretching his neck after a long ride, letting his eyes pass over the room as if looking at nothing in particular. The man standing just inside the door was exactly what she had described. Tall, well-dressed in a way that suggested money without announcing it. A dark charcoal suit that was too good for this diner, and too good for this weather, though the weather had not touched it in any visible way. White shirt, no tie. Hair neatly combed despite the storm, and yes, a smile. Pleasant, easy, the practiced kind. The kind that has been calibrated over years to read as warmth. He let his eyes move around the room in the way of a person looking for someone specific, but not wanting anyone to know who they were looking. The eyes found Ruth. The smile did not change. That was the thing Boone noticed first. Most people, when they find what they are looking for, show it. A flicker. A small shift. The real face surfacing for just a second before the controlled one reasserts itself. This man's face did not flicker. It simply held its configuration exactly the same, as if the face and the reality behind it had been disconnected long enough that the habit no longer required reality to operate. The man came forward, unhurried, smooth. The walk of a person who had never not once felt the pressure of needing to move faster because things were not going his way. He stopped at Ruth's other side. He placed one hand on the counter. Not on her, not touching her, but close. The specific quality of close that communicated a thing without technically doing the thing. You had us all so worried, he said. His voice was warm, concerned, practiced. Ruth did not look at him. The man shifted his gaze to Boone. His expression maintained its warmth with the consistency of something painted on. I'm sorry if my mother has disturbed your evening. He said it with the ease of someone who had said similar things many times. She has a tendency to wander, especially when she's confused. We've been looking for her for hours. He reached into his jacket with practiced ease and produced a business card, which he set on the counter in front of Boone. Warren Lyle, attorney at law, Scottsdale. Boone looked at the card, set it on the counter without picking it up. "She's not confused," he said. A pause, brief enough to almost not be there. "Excuse me." She walked straight to me, sat down, ordered her tea, talked to me clearly. Boone looked up, met Lyle's eyes, held them without expression and without warmth. "That's not confused." Lyle's smile did not move. "She has good days and bad days, I'm sure she seemed." "She told me she's my grandmother," Boone said. "I know I look a lot like my father, and his side of the family always ran dark. So maybe that's not obvious right away. But she called me 3 nights ago and left a message that made complete sense. I drove out from Tucson because she asked me to come." He tilted his head very slightly. "So I'm going to need you to explain to me how a woman who did all of that is confused." Something moved behind Lyle's eyes. Not warmth and not concern. A recalculation. The expression of a man who has encountered a variable he did not prepare for and is running the numbers in real time. "I understand your position," Lyle said. His voice had dropped a register. The warmth was still present in it technically, but it had become something else now. A surface, a coat of paint over concrete. "But I am her attorney of record and her designated caretaker. And I have documentation. This is a legal matter, and it would be in everyone's best interest if you what Boone said." The questions sat between them. Lyle looked at Boone Haskell for a moment. All of him. The 6 feet and 240 pounds of it. The cut. The patches. The hands on the counter that were not gripping anything, not balled into fists, just resting. Which was somehow more concerning than either of those things would have been. The eyes that had seen enough of the world's worst situations that they had stopped performing a reaction to new ones. Lyle leaned slightly closer, kept his voice below the ambient sound of the diner. The way he said the next words told Boone they had been prepared in advance. "Walk away," Lyle said. "The boy wouldn't want you mixed up in this." The room did not change. Norma kept filling a coffee cup at the far end of the counter. The couple in the booth kept not looking at them. The rain kept doing what the rain was doing. But something went very still inside Boone Haskell. Not fear. The opposite of fear. The specific cold clarity that comes when someone has used the wrong lever on you. When they have calculated what they think will move you and have calculated wrong. When what they intended as a threat has instead told you exactly what kind of man you are dealing with and exactly what that man is willing to do. The boy. Lyle had said the boy, which meant Voss's operation had Boone's file, had done the work of finding what would break him, had found Danny's name and Danny's story, and had loaded it into the attorney's mouth for this specific moment, in this specific diner, on this specific night. They had prepared for this. They had prepared for someone trying to help Ruth. That told Boone everything he needed to know. Boone nodded slowly, the nod of a man working through arithmetic. "See, my situation is this," he said. "My grandmother called me. I came. She's sitting right here having her tea." He picked up his coffee. "And I have nowhere else to be." Ruth sat perfectly still beside him. She had not looked at Warren Lyle once since he had walked in. But under the counter, out of sight, her hand had found the edge of Boone's stool, not gripping it, just resting against it, the way you touch something solid when the ground is uncertain. Lyle looked at them both for a long moment. Then he straightened, adjusted his jacket with the small, precise gesture of a man reasserting his arrangement. The smile did not leave. It simply became something that lived entirely on the surface of his face, unconnected to anything underneath a mask that had stayed on so long. It had started to believe it was a face. "All right," he said, quietly, almost gently. He turned and walked back toward the door. The storm took him. The diner breathed. "How long?" Boone said. He was still looking at his coffee. Ruth's hand was still resting against the side of his stool. He could feel the slight pressure of it. "Not long," she said. "He'll make a call first." "What kind of call?" She was quiet for a moment. The rain against the roof was steady and heavy. "The kind of call," she said carefully, "that brings more people." Boone turned and looked at her fully for the first time since she had sat down. She met his gaze and did not look away, and he understood then what had made him say yes. Not the trembling and not the desperation, and not even the dignity, though all of those had been real. It was that she had walked toward him, in a room full of people who had looked away the moment he walked in. This 89-year-old woman had stood up from her table across the floor and come straight at the man that everyone else had already decided was something to be avoided. Not because she was not afraid. She was afraid. He could see it in every line of her. She had done it anyway. "Okay," he said. He turned back to the counter. "Tell me about the drive." Her posture shifted. Something in her shoulders barely perceptible. The way a person settles when they realize they are going to be heard. "Edwin made 3 copies," she said. "He always said that a single point of failure was the same as having no backup at all." She almost smiled at that. Not quite. He was a very thorough man. "Where are the other 2? "I mailed one to an attorney in Phoenix 3 days ago. A man Edwin trusted completely. I have not been able to reach him since." The almost smile was gone. "The second was at our home in Scottsdale. I left before I could retrieve it. I don't know if they have found it by now." "So, the copy you're carrying may be the only one that still exists." "Yes." She met his eyes. "Which is why I need to get it into the right hands. A federal agent, a prosecutor, someone entirely outside the county system." She exhaled slowly. "I have been trying to reach Flagstaff for 2 days. Every time I stop somewhere to make contact, they appear, as if they know where I'm going before I get there." Boone turned that over. 2 days. This woman had been running for 2 days alone at 89 years old, in an Arizona spring with weather going sideways, staying ahead of men in black vehicles, on the strength of nothing but the evidence her dead husband had spent 8 months building. She had no phone, he guessed. No credit cards. "Why me?" he said. He needed to hear it. She did not hesitate. "Because everyone else in this room is hoping the problem will resolve itself without requiring them to act," she said. "You are the only person here who has ever had to face something directly and live with the result." She paused. "I could see it the moment you walked in. The way you carry yourself. You're not afraid of consequences. Most people are. That's why they look away." She looked at him. "I don't need someone unafraid of everything. I just need someone who isn't afraid of this." Boone put his coffee mug down. He did it slowly with the care of a man who is thinking through something and is not going to stop thinking about it just because a decision has already been made. He reached into his jacket and found his phone and kept it below the counter level. and sent a single text to a number he had not used in 6 weeks. Then he waited. Outside, through the rain-blurred window, a pair of headlights rolled slowly into the gravel lot and stopped. Then another pair. Then a third. 3 pairs of headlights, parked, engines off. Nobody getting out. Boone kept his eyes on his coffee and ran the calculation in his head. Lyle had walked out 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes to make a call and have 3 vehicles already in position meant they had not been driving around looking for Ruth at all. They had been staged nearby waiting for a location confirmation, which meant someone had known Ruth was here before Lyle walked through the door. There was a leak. Someone in the diner or someone who had seen her come in. He filed that and kept moving. His phone buzzed once under the counter. He read the reply, typed 2 words, got a response in 11 seconds. He put the phone away. "Can you move quickly when I tell you to?" he said. Ruth looked at him. She had been watching the counter in front of her with the focused patience of a woman who had learned to wait without appearing to wait. "I walked 4 miles 2 days ago to avoid a checkpoint." "I did not trust," she said. "I am not frail." "I know you're not frail." "I'm asking about fast." "Yes." "Good." He looked at Norma, who had been occupying herself at the far end of the counter with the careful attention of a woman who needed to be busy with something and had chosen the task nearest to her. Norma. She came over. Boone put $250 on the counter, more than 3 times what his coffee and pie had cost. He kept his voice at the precise volume that carried to Norma and did not carry further. "I need a favor. In about 4 minutes, I need you to turn the lights off, all of them, for about 30 seconds. Norma looked at the money, then at Boone, then at Ruth, whose hands were folded on the counter with that absolute and unyielding composure. Something moved through Norma's face, something old, something that recognized the specific shape of a situation, even when it could not name the details. She had seen things in her life, Boone figured. This diner on this highway had seen things. She reached out and took the bills off the counter without a word. "Breaker box is in the back," she said, "near the kitchen door." She walked away without looking at either of them again. The diner door opened. Not Lyle this time. 2 men, both in their 30s. Jackets over collared shirts. Business casual in the deliberately generic way of people who want to pass as something ordinary. One was broad through the neck and shoulders with the specific build of a man who had spent years in a job that required physical authority. The other was leaner with a quality of stillness that Boone recognized from a different kind of life entirely, not military trained, but trained by someone who knew what they were doing. They took a table near the door, not the counter, a table that gave both of them sightlines to the full room. Boone did not look at them directly. He heard Norma set something on the counter at the far end. He heard the couple in the corner booth stop talking entirely. He could feel the temperature of the room change, not the actual temperature, but the quality of the air, the way a room's atmosphere shifts when the number of possible bad outcomes increases without announcement. "Don't turn around," Boone said. "I know," Ruth said. She had not moved. Then the door opened a 3rd time. Lyle walked back in. This time, everything about him was different. Not dramatically. Not in the cinematic way of a villain whose mask has been stripped away. If anything, he looked calmer than before, smoother. The composure of a man who has made a decision and is no longer burdened by the question of whether to make it. He crossed the floor without acknowledging the 2 men at the table near the door. Not ignoring them exactly, but not registering them either. The practiced non-communication of people who know their roles and do not need to rehearse them. He came straight to the counter. He stood this time, not sitting. "I owe you an apology," he said to Boone. "I was abrupt earlier. It's been a stressful few days and I took it out on a stranger. I'm sorry." "No harm done," Boone said. "I've spoken with her physician." Lyle produced his phone. Screen facing up a call in progress. "Dr. Hargrove out of Scottsdale. He can explain the situation in more detail if you'd like to speak with him." Boone looked at the phone. "What's her condition?" he said. "Progressive cognitive decline." Lyle's voice was smooth and measured and carried the particular warmth of a rehearsed performance. "Early to moderate stage. Some days she is entirely lucid. Other days." "What's her birthday?" A pause. Small, almost nothing. But it was there. "I beg your pardon. If she's in your care and you've known her for years, you know her birthday?" Boone looked up, met Lyle's eyes, held them. "March," Lyle said. Ruth had not looked up from her tea. She spoke clearly and without hesitation, and without raising her voice at all. "March 8th, she said. 1934. And my attorney's name is a man I chose myself, and whose card is in my wallet. And my son's name is Owen. He lives in Denver. I spoke with him this morning." She set her mug down with the quiet precision of someone placing the final piece of a puzzle. "You are not anyone I have authorized to speak on my behalf." The diner went silent, the real kind of silent. Not the ripple that spreads from a moment of tension, the pressurized kind that settles when everyone in a room simultaneously understands that something has shifted, and none of them know yet which direction it will fall. Lyle's face did something then. The smile did not disappear. It held its shape with the persistence of something practiced so long that the muscles had learned to maintain it independent of intention. But the quality behind it withdrew, and what remained was just the arrangement of features, the architecture of an expression without the occupant. He said her name, just her name, once, low, in a tone that compressed everything into 2 syllables, the warning and the promise and the patience of a man who fully intended to get what he came for. "Do not use my name," Ruth said. Her voice was not loud. It was not shaking. It was a blade. Not drawn in anger, just present. "You came to Edwin 6 months before he died." She looked directly at the surface of the counter, not at Lyle as if he were not worth the movement of her eyes. "You offered him money to stop looking. He told me about it that same night. He said he wished he could feel sorry for the man who came to make the offer." She paused. "He couldn't. And you said his name at his funeral, the way people say a name when they have been waiting to bury it. I have not been able to stand the sound of my own name in your mouth since." The room held its breath. Boone had been in a lot of bad rooms in his life, had heard a lot of things come out of a lot of people's mouths in moments when the normal rules of speech had been suspended. But there was something in those sentences, the precision of them, the way decades of contained grief had been pressed into something hard and sharp, and exactly as long as it needed to be, and no longer. And the fact that she had known from the beginning exactly who Lyle was and what he had tried to do to Edwin, and had said nothing until this moment when saying it did the most damage. Lyle looked at Boone. The calculation was open now, no longer pretending to be anything else. "Whatever she has told you," he said, "you are in a situation you don't fully understand, and I am giving you the opportunity to remove yourself from it before that becomes a problem for you personally." That sounds like a threat. It's a courtesy. Boone leaned back slightly on his stool. tilted his head a fraction. The thing about courtesy, he said, is that it usually runs both directions. Lyle held his gaze for a long moment. Boone did not look away, did not look down, did not shift his weight, or adjust his hands, or do any of the small, unconscious things that bodies do when they want to appear less threatening than they are. He simply sat with the coffee mug within reach and looked back at Warren Lyle, with the flat, unhurried patience of a man who had been in rooms that ended badly and had always walked out of them. Lyle blinked. It was a small thing, a fraction of a second, but it happened. And he knew Boone saw it, and Boone knew that he knew. And in that cracked open moment, something behind the controlled exterior showed itself. Not fear, exactly. More like the recalibration of a man who has spent a long time being the most prepared person in any given room and has just met a room that prepared for him. He looked away. A slight signal passed between him and the two men at the door table. Then he looked back at Boone. "I'll give you a moment to reconsider," Lyle said. He walked to a booth near the window and sat down, still visible, still watching. Boone turned back to the counter. He picked up his coffee. "Where's the drive right now?" he said. "On your body." "Inside my left shoe," Ruth said. She said it with the restrained dignity of a woman revealing a hand of cards she had been holding for 2 days. Edwin said the most overlooked places are always the most ordinary ones. Smart man, the smartest I ever knew. A pause so brief it might have been breathing. That is why they killed him. Boone. She said his name the same way she had said Edwin's, not performing anything, just placing weight behind it. "I'm going to get you out of here." He kept his voice at the level it had been the level that carried to her, and did not carry further. "But I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it, without asking why. Can you do that?" She turned and looked at him fully. This woman who had been running on nothing but purpose and memory for 2 days. Who had walked across this diner floor toward the biggest and most obviously dangerous stranger in the room, because she had assessed every other option and found them all closed. "Young man," she said quietly, "I survived the loss of my husband of 51 years. I survived 14 months of carrying his work alone. I survived 2 days of running from men who killed him and would not hesitate to do the same to me." She looked at him steadily. "I think I can manage to follow instructions." Boone nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, found his phone, kept it below the counter and typed a message without looking down. Sent it. 10 seconds. 20. His phone buzzed once. He read the reply, typed again, got a response in less than 15 seconds. He put the phone away. Outside, through the fogged window, the 3 pairs of headlights sat motionless in the gravel lot. Beyond them, the highway was dark and wet, and the storm was moving east now, dragging its sound with it. And the air in the diner was the specific compressed quality of a place where something is about to happen, and everyone can feel it. But only a few of them know what it is. He looked at Norma at the far end of the counter. She was occupied with the task she had chosen for herself and had been choosing for the last 10 minutes, the task of being busy and not seeing anything. But her back was toward the breaker box door. Boone raised his hand. She came over. "When I give you the signal," he said, "you know what to do." Norma looked at him, then at Ruth. Her hands were steady on the counter. She nodded once. She walked toward the back. Boone turned to Ruth. "When the lights go off," he said, "you stand up. You put your hand on my left arm. You do not let go. We're going through the kitchen. There's a service road on the other side. Someone will be there. She did not ask who. She simply nodded. He looked at her one last time in the lit diner. This woman with her straight spine and her hands that had finally quietly stopped clasping each other and were resting flat on the counter. Her face carried everything she had been through and showed none of it, except in the eyes which were the same as they had been when she first walked toward him. Sharp, steady, completely terrified and refusing to be stopped by any of it. Edwin used to say she told him softly that the truest thing about a person was the direction they moved in a frightening moment. Boone said nothing. Then the lights went out. The darkness lasted 3 seconds before the shouting started. Not from Lyle, from the thick-necked one by the door. A sharp cut word that came through the black, like something thrown, followed immediately by the scrape of chairs and the hard ceramic crack of something hitting the floor, and the couple in the far booth making a single involuntary sound that was half surprise and half the release of 40 minutes of held tension. Boone was already moving. He had Ruth's hand on his arm before the sound reached him and was off the stool and moving by the mental map he had built without appearing to build it across the previous hour. Counter edge on his left, gap. Kitchen door propped open by the sound of the dishwasher still running, which meant noise, which meant cover. It was the only luck they had gotten all evening, and he intended to use every second of it. "Step up," he said quietly. She stepped without asking why, clearing the threshold. The kitchen smelled like fryer oil and old heat. One cook, young early 20s, stood frozen with a spatula in his hand and eyes that had gone wide and were working very hard to process what was happening in the space where he had been standing alone 30 seconds ago. "Back door," Boone said to him. "Which way?" The kid pointed left, past the prep counter toward the far wall. "Stay in here and keep your head down." He moved. Behind them, the diner was shifting into chaos that sounded controlled, and that controlled quality was what made it dangerous. Lyle's voice rising above the noise with the practiced calm of a man who did not shout because shouting was for people who were not certain they would get what they wanted. His voice was saying something about checking the back. The consonants clipped and purposeful. Boone calculated 45 seconds, maybe less, before someone came through the kitchen door. Ruth's hand was on his arm, and she was moving. Not fast by the standard of youth, but fast enough and, more importantly, steady. She did not hesitate. She did not stumble. She moved exactly the way she had said she would, the way of a woman who had spent 2 days getting very good at not stopping. Boone hit the push bar on the back door with his forearm, and it swung open into the wet dark. And the rain hit them both immediately cold and sideways, and he heard it before he saw it, the low idle of a motorcycle engine. Then, 2, 3 bikes pulled up along the service road with their headlights off, running on parking lights, only the engines idling at a sound low enough that the rain nearly covered it. The lead rider killed his engine the moment the back door swung open and came off the bike in one motion, pulling his helmet back in a single sweep. His name was Cody Prentice, 38 years old. Hell's Angels, Arizona, Chapter 11 years. Built like a man who had spent those years doing physical things that mattered and had stopped thinking about how he looked doing them. His face was wind-burned and calm, and he took in the scene in front of him with the efficient assessment of someone accustomed to arriving places where the situation had already developed before he got there. He looked at Ruth, soaked through her cardigan within the first 10 seconds of the rain. Hair pressed flat at the edges, chin up, not making a sound about any of it. He nodded once, the specific kind of nod that means I understand the assignment and I'm not going to spend time discussing it. "Truck at the end of the road," he said to Boone. "Keys are in it. They have the lot covered." Boone was already reading the geometry. Front, and both sides. Not the East Service Road. We came in from there. Nobody on it. Good. Boone looked at Ruth. She was already looking at the bikes at Cody at the dark road behind them, processing all of it with those sharp and level eyes. She was soaked through, and she had said nothing about it. "Can you ride?" he said. "On a motorcycle. Just to the truck. 200 yards. She looked at the nearest bike, then at Cody, then back at Boone, and something in her expression shifted, not quite humor, but the closest relative of it that the situation would allow. "I rode in 1971, she said. "With Edwin. He had a Triumph. He was not particularly good at it." She paused. "I'll manage." Cody was already pulling off his jacket without being asked. He held it out to Ruth. "Not an offer. A fact. Put this around your shoulders." She took it. "Thank you." "Yes, ma'am." They moved. Cody got on first, and Boone helped Ruth up behind him. Her movements deliberate and slower, but not weak. The movements of someone who understood the mechanics of what they were doing and was not going to be rushed into doing it incorrectly. She gripped Cody's midsection with both arms, and Boone thought, not for the first time in the past hour, that this woman was something entirely different from what the word 89 had ever suggested to him before. Boone got on the second bike. The second rider settled in behind him without a word, the way experienced riders do when the situation has been read and words would only slow things down. The third bike peeled off first, heading north on the service road with its headlight on and its engine deliberately loud, drawing attention toward the wrong side of the building. Cody waited 4 seconds, then pulled out smooth and slow, no headlight running on memory of the road and the parking lights of the truck visible 40 yards ahead through the rain. Behind them, Boone heard the kitchen door bang open. Someone coming through. He calculated the distance and the angle and the time it would take someone moving fast to cover the ground between that door and the end of the service road. And the answer was not enough time. They were already past the midpoint. The truck was an old Chevy long bed, dark blue, exactly where Cody had said it would be. Boone was off the bike and had the passenger door open before Cody had fully stopped. He helped Ruth down from the back of the bike. Her hands were cold. He could feel it when he gripped them. He got her into the passenger seat and came around to the driver's side. "Boone." Cody's voice, low. Boone turned. Cody was looking back toward the diner. The beam of a flashlight was sweeping around the east side of the building. Someone had thought of the service road faster than expected. "Go," Cody said. "We'll keep them occupied." Boone did not argue. He got in, found the keys where Cody had said they would be turned the engine over. It caught on the first try. He pulled forward onto the service road and turned north without lights, and did not turn them on until he hit the paved county road and pointed the truck north. Behind them, nothing for 3 seconds. Then he saw them. Headlights sweeping out onto the county road. One vehicle moving fast. He pushed the truck harder. The county road ran straight and long through the desert dark, the rain making the surface reflective and slightly unpredictable under the tires. The truck handled it solidly, old American steel. He could feel the weight of it absorbing the road instead of arguing with it. Ruth sat with her hands in her lap, Cody's jacket across her shoulders, watching the passenger side mirror with the focused attention of someone tracking a variable they have been watching for 2 days. "They're following," she said. "I see them." "How far back?" "Quarter mile. Maybe less." He thought fast. There was a junction coming up in a little under 2 miles. Route 89 splitting northeast and southeast. If he took the northeast fork toward Flagstaff, and they stayed behind him, the gap would likely close before he got there. If he took the southeast fork, he bought time but gave up the only destination he had currently mapped. "We're not going to Flagstaff," Ruth said. He glanced at her. "I've been trying to reach Flagstaff for 2 days." She was looking straight ahead now, not at the mirror. "Which means for 2 days they have been expecting me to go to Flagstaff." She looked at him. "Edwin always said never go where they expect you. Go where you decided 30 seconds ago." Boone stared at the road for a half-beat. Then he said, "Where did I just decide?" "You tell me. You know this state." He thought fast. Position, resources, distance. Who he knew within a drive rather than a text. Who was not in any system that could be searched or flagged or called up on a screen somewhere. "There's a man named Garth Dillon," he said. "Lives outside Wickenburg, about 45 minutes east. Used to carry a federal badge. He's been out of the system for years. Out how long? 7 years. Maybe 8. Which means his name won't surface on any active contact list. That's the idea." He paused. "And he owes me." Ruth considered this for exactly the length of time it deserved. "All right," she said. Boone reached the junction and took the east fork without slowing. The tires complained slightly on the wet curve, and behind them, the pursuing headlights took the corner too. Still there. Still the same distance. He kept his hands steady on the wheel. His breathing was controlled. His mind was running through the variables with the quiet efficiency that had always come to him in situations that had compressed down to their essentials when the noise fell away. And what remained was only what was actually true. What was true was this. He had an old woman in the passenger seat carrying the only surviving copy of evidence that had already gotten her husband killed. He had one vehicle following him on a wet highway at night. He had a contact roughly 40 minutes away who might be reachable by a road the people behind him could not anticipate. And he had the road itself, which he knew the way he knew his own hands. There was a grade coming up in about a mile. A long, straight stretch. First, then the road lifting into a shallow rise. He had ridden this route enough times that it lived in him, the way music lives in people who have played something, until it stops being a skill and becomes a reflex. He pulled out his phone with his right hand, keeping his left on the wheel. "Type this number in," he said. "Don't call yet. Just have it ready." He gave her 11 digits from memory. Ruth typed them without dropping the phone and without asking him to repeat them. "Ready," she said. "When I tell you to call it and put it on speaker." They drove in silence for almost 3 minutes. The headlights behind them maintained their distance, not gaining, not falling back, pacing. The road began to rise. "Now," Boone said. Ruth called the number. It rang once, twice. The voice that answered did not say hello. It said, "Who's this flat?" and direct the voice of a man who had trained himself not to give anything away in the first second of a call. "Boone Haskell," Boone said. A pause. Then something shifted in the voice. Not warmth exactly, but the register of genuine surprise in a person who had learned not to perform it. "I'll be damned." "Where are you?" "Route 89 heading east toward Wickenburg. I need 3 things, and I need them fast." "Go ahead." "First, someone needs to run a plate for me. Black SUV following about a quarter mile behind me right now. I don't have the plate yet, but I need it inside 10 minutes if possible." A beat. "I have people who can do that." "What's the second thing?" "Safe location. Not your house. Somewhere your name is not attached to on paper." Silence for a moment. The sound of a man thinking through what he had available. There's a property south of Wickenburg. Belongs to my brother-in-law's estate, in a trust. My name is not on the deed anywhere. Access road off the 93 unmarked. There's a gate. I'll give you the combination. That's the second thing. Third. Boone watched the road. The grade was cresting now. He could see the long, straight descent on the other side. Third, he said, I need a federal contact, outside the state system entirely. Someone with authority to receive evidence and act on it tonight. A longer silence this time. How serious are we talking? $14 million, Boone said. County-level corruption. 2 politicians. 1 law enforcement official at the command level. And a woman who has been running alone for 2 days carrying the documentation. The silence on the other end had a different quality now. Garth Boone said, Yeah, this is the favor. Another pause. The kind that has real weight in it. Yeah, Garth Dillon said. I figured it was when you called. All right. Get off 89 at the junction near mile marker 31. There's a gravel road heading south, no sign. 4 miles in, there's a gate. Combination is 6421. Through the gate, half-mile more. I'll make calls on my end. Give me 40 minutes. We'll be there in 45. Who is she? Boone glanced at Ruth. Someone's wife, he said. Doing what her husband would have done if they had let him live long enough to do it. A short pause on the other end. Get off at 31. I'll see you through the gate. The call ended. Boone looked at the road ahead. The descent was long and straight, and the headlights behind him had taken the rise at the same distance they had been maintaining since the county road. Still pacing. Still there. He let another full minute pass. Then he said, Hold on to something. And he cut the headlights on a wet Arizona highway in the dark at 68 miles an hour. With rain on the road and nothing but what you remember of the shoulder to navigate by this, was the kind of maneuver that ended badly for people who had always had better options available to them. Boone had grown up without better options. He had learned the road the way you learn something when you cannot afford the cost of forgetting it. He counted. 1, 2, 3. At 4, he stood on the brakes and felt the truck resist, and then accept it. The weight shifting forward, and he turned the wheel by feel alone toward the right, toward the memory of gravel he had seen in his headlights. 2 seconds before he cut them, and the truck left the pavement, and the sound changed from smooth to rough, and the brush along the sides scraped the undercarriage, and he let the truck roll forward until it stopped. He killed the engine. He and Ruth sat in the absolute dark. On the highway behind them, the pursuing headlights came up the grade at speed, held their course, passed, did not brake, did not turn. The sound of the engine faded east along the highway and then was gone, replaced by the rain on the roof of the truck and the sound of both of them breathing. Ruth was still for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, Edwin would have liked you. Boone sat with that for a moment. The rain kept coming down. The highway was empty in both directions. Tell me about him, he said. He was not asking to fill the silence. He was asking because he had heard her say her husband's name 3 times now. And each time there was something in those 2 syllables that was clear and incomplete at once. A man he was beginning to understand in outline without knowing the detail. A man who had spent 8 months alone with a secret because he believed that accuracy was a form of respect and had been killed for the precision of his honesty. Ruth was quiet for just a moment. He believed she said that the purpose of doing the right thing was not the reward. It was to be able to live with yourself afterward. She paused. He said the people who do wrong always count on the people who do right, being too afraid to act. That fear was the only advantage the wrong ever truly had over the right. She looked out through the rain-streaked windshield at the empty dark. He was not afraid of them, she said. That was the problem. She stopped. Or maybe it wasn't a problem. Maybe it was simply who he was. Boone turned the engine back on and pulled carefully back onto the highway. Headlights on now, moving east slower than before. Looking for mile marker 31. The drive, he said. When we get to Garth and he gets us the federal contact, what do you want to happen to the 3 names on that list? Ruth reached down without hesitation and removed her left shoe. She turned it over. A small drive fell into her palm no larger than a thumb. Black plastic casing looking like something you would find forgotten in a desk drawer. She held it and looked at it for a moment with an expression that was not triumph and was not relief. Something older and harder than either of those. Something that had been waiting a long time to mean what it was about to mean. Whatever Edwin believed was supposed to happen. She said when the truth got into the right hands. She closed her fingers around it. He believed it, even at the end, even knowing what it was costing him. He believed in it. She looked at Boone. So do I. He nodded and said nothing. He pointed the truck east and drove. Mile marker 31 appeared in the headlights, and he took the South Fork without slowing. Gravel under the tires. The road narrow and uneven with the kind of surface that had not been maintained, because it was not meant to be found by people who were not looking for it specifically. The desert on both sides was dark and close, and the rain had finally begun to slow dropping from assault to presence. The sound of it changing on the roof of the truck. 4 miles and the gate appeared. Metal frame, combination lock. He stopped the truck, got out into what was left of the rain, worked the numbers Garth had given him. 6, 4, 2, 1. The lock opened. He drove through, left the gate behind him, went another half-mile on a road that became more suggestion than fact, until the shape of a structure appeared in the headlights. Low, dark, a ranch building that had been kept but not showcased. The kind of place where the goal was function and privacy, not impression. A single light came on inside as he cut the engine. Not overhead lighting. Something lower. A lamp. The kind of light that says, I am here, but I am not announcing it. Boone got out first. He came around to the passenger side and helped Ruth down. The ground was wet and uneven, and she took his arm without comment, and they walked toward the building together. The man who opened the door was Garth Dillon, 62 years old, shorter than Boone by 4 inches and broader through the chest and shoulders than anyone his age had a right to be. Gray hair cut close, the particular stillness of a man who had spent years in rooms where stillness was an operational requirement and had never fully turned it off after he left. He looked at Boone. He looked at Ruth. He stepped back from the door. Come in, he said. Inside it was warm. Someone had left the heat running. There was a folding table with 3 chairs, a laptop, a legal pad, a pen, and 2 phones, one of which was still in its packaging. Sit, Garth said. He was already moving to the table. He opened the burner, powered it on, set it in front of Ruth. I reached out to a contact while you were driving, he said. Her name is Peggy Strand, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, FBI Phoenix Field Office. I've known her for 14 years. She is not compromised. I would stake something meaningful on that. How meaningful, Boone said. My professional reputation, and probably my pension. He looked at Ruth. She wants to speak with you directly before any transfer of material. She is ready when you are. Ruth's hands were on the table folded. She had not removed Cody's jacket from her shoulders. She was looking at Garth with the evaluating attention of a woman who had learned to read people over 8 decades and was applying everything she knew. That's reasonable, she said. Tell her to call. Garth looked at her for a moment with an expression that adjusted, not softened, but adjusted. Like a man who had expected one thing and encountered something with different dimensions. He picked up the burner and dialed. Then he set it on the table between them. It rang twice. The voice that came through was measured and precise, and awake in the way that senior federal law enforcement is awake at midnight when something important has found its way to them. Mrs. Callahan, the voice said. Yes, I've been briefed on the outline of your situation. I need to ask you some questions before we go any further. Some of them will feel intrusive. That's necessary. I need you to understand that going in. Ruth looked at Boone. He kept his face still. This was her call. Everything from this point was her call. Ask, she said. What followed was 20 minutes of the most methodical interview Boone had ever listened to without participating in. Strand asked about Edwin's employment record, his specific access within the county auditor's office, the timeline of when the discrepancies first appeared, and when Edwin first began documenting them, who he had spoken to, and in what order, how the documentation had been created and preserved, and exactly when and how Ruth had come to be in sole possession of the primary drive. She asked about the attorney Ruth had mailed the backup copy to. She asked about Owen's phone call. And she asked about Warren Lyle by name. There was a pause before she said that name. A controlled pause of less than 2 seconds that told Boone more than anything else in the conversation had. Ruth answered everything, without hesitation, and without embellishment, and without a single word she had not already decided to say. She laid it out in sequence with the precision of a woman who had been listening to a meticulous man for 51 years and had absorbed his method the way you absorb the habits of someone you have lived beside long enough that the habits become your own. When she finished, there was a silence on the line. Mrs. Callahan, the third name, the one your husband traced the money to beyond the politicians and the developer. I need that name. Ruth looked at Boone. He kept his face completely still. This was not his decision. She looked at the phone. His name is Chester Voss, she said. He is the assistant sheriff of Maricopa County. The silence this time was longer. Garth, who had been standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his face arranged in the careful neutrality of a man who had heard many things and trained himself not to register them visibly, uncrossed his arms. Slowly. The movement of a body responding before the mind gave permission. Say that name again, Strand said. Chester Voss, Ruth repeated. Edwin had 11 months of documentation on him specifically. Account transfers, contract approval chains, communications. Edwin believed that Voss was not merely a recipient but the architect. The politicians and the developer received money. Voss designed the mechanism and controlled it. Boone heard Garth exhale through his nose, a sound so small it was almost nothing. But Garth was not a man who made involuntary sounds. Chester Voss, Strand said, as if she were writing it down carefully and checking the letters. Mrs. Callahan, I need you to understand what you have just said and what it means for the next steps. It means, Ruth said quietly, that we cannot use any law enforcement channel at the county level. and possibly not at the state level depending on how far his relationships extend. That is correct, Strand said. And it means this conversation needs to remain completely contained from this point forward. She paused. Mr. Dillon, are you on the line? I'm here, Garth said. I need the drive contents transmitted to a secure portal tonight. I will text you the access credentials on a clean channel. I want the originals in my hands within 48 hours. And I want Mrs. Callahan in a secure location until I can arrange a formal protective presence that has no connection to county or state infrastructure. She paused again. Can the person who got her here facilitate that? Boone leaned toward the phone. Yes. Good. She was already talking to someone in the background, the phone not fully away from her mouth, her voice dropping below the register of the speaker for a moment. Then she came back. I'm initiating a formal request to bypass county law enforcement channels on this matter entirely. That will take time. The evidence needs to be in my hands first. Are you ready to transmit? Garth had already opened the laptop. He talked Ruth through the steps without using technical language, translating each instruction into plain action. Ruth followed without asking for repetition, her hands moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that each step mattered and was not going to rush through one to get to the next. The progress bar appeared on the screen. Running, Garth said. They waited. The rain had stopped entirely now. The desert outside the small ranch building was very quiet. Somewhere in the dark, Cody was still out there maintaining his position, watching the highway. Boone had not heard from him since the truck left the service road, which was exactly right. No news meant nothing had changed. He kept his phone in his hand anyway. The progress bar moved. At 41%, Garth's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. His expression did not change, but the set of his jaw shifted by a small, precise amount. He looked at Boone. Boone's own phone buzzed in his hand at almost the same moment. He looked down. A message from Cody. 4 words. 3 vehicles. Moving east. He read it twice. Set the phone face down on the table and looked at Garth without saying anything. Garth read the look. How far out, Garth said. They're on 89. If they know this location. They don't, Garth said. This property is not connected to me anywhere in writing. You certain? A pause. Half a second. I'm certain. You hesitated. I was thinking. Garth moved to the window. He did not open it. He positioned himself where he could listen to what was outside without changing what was visible from outside. My brother-in-law, Garth said. His name is Stewart. We have not spoken in 3 years. He knows about this property because it was part of his family estate. But he has no connection to any of this. Could his phone be flagged? Garth turned from the window. His jaw was set in a particular way. I called Stewart, he said, this afternoon, when I was making arrangements. I told him the property would be used tonight. He stopped. I used my personal phone. Boone looked at him. Before I opened the burner, Garth said. The sequence ran through his expression like something working through a system. Connecting points he had not connected before arriving at the conclusion, with the grim precision of a man who did not permit himself the comfort of pretending he had not made the error. I called Stewart from my personal cell. I told him the location would be in use if Voss has a flag on my number. They had an hour, Boone said. At least. The upload was at 63%. How long, Boone said to Garth. Garth looked at the screen. 8 minutes. Maybe 7. 7 minutes. If Voss's people had been moving since Garth's call to Stuart, if there was any kind of monitoring on Garth's personal number, if they had identified this property through Stuart's phone and put vehicles in motion immediately, then 7 minutes was close to exactly what they had left before arrival. Boone stood. He looked at the screen. He looked at Ruth, who was watching the progress bar with the focused patience of a woman who understood that the last 10% of anything always took the longest, and that understanding that did not make it move faster. He looked at Strand's voice still coming from the speaker. "Strand," he said. "Yes. The upload is running. We may have a location compromise developing. How quickly can you have federal presence at these coordinates?" Strand did not pause. "Give me the coordinates and do not stop that upload for any reason." Garth gave her the coordinates. She was already speaking to someone in the background, her voice dropping out of the speaker's range. Boone looked at Ruth. She was sitting with her hands on the table and her eyes on the screen, and the set of her shoulders was the set of a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and was watching the last stage of setting it down, and was not going to look away from that screen for any reason while it was still running. "What do you need me to do?" she said. He looked at her. She was tired. He could see it now in the fine lines around her eyes, and the set of her mouth, and the way her shoulders held themselves. The tiredness that adrenaline had been holding at bay for 2 days, finally beginning to press through. But her eyes were the same as they had been when she first walked toward him in Harlan's diner, clear and steady and completely resolved. "Stay at this table," he said. "Don't move away from that screen." He looked at Garth. "I'm going outside." Garth looked at him. "Keep the upload running," Boone said. He was already moving. He went out the way they had come in, pulling the door almost closed behind him enough to keep the lamplight inside. He stood in the wet dark and listened. The rain was entirely finished now. The worst of the storm had moved east and taken its sound with it, and what remained was the desert quiet that comes after weather, the specific clean silence of a landscape that has been washed and is breathing again. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the settling sound of the truck's engine cooling in the dark. He could not hear vehicles. He stood for 90 seconds, long enough to be reasonably certain he was not missing the vibration of an approaching engine. Then he moved around the perimeter of the building. Not because he thought anyone was already there, but because standing still when his instincts wanted him moving was the thing you did when you had discipline left. And discipline was the only thing that had kept this night from going worse at several points. He had made it around 3/4 of the building when his phone buzzed. Cody. Not a message this time. A call. He picked up immediately. "What?" The vehicles stopped. Cody's voice was low and precise. "All 3. About 1.5 miles back on 89. Parked on the shoulder. They're not moving." "How long?" 4 minutes now. Boone processed this. Parked on the shoulder. Not advancing, not retreating. Holding position. Which meant someone had given them a new instruction. Which meant whoever was coordinating this operation had made a decision and communicated it. Something in Boone's chest settled in a specific way. Not relaxation. The thing that happens when a situation clarifies. Something else, Cody said. About 5 minutes before they stopped, another vehicle came from the opposite direction. Different from the SUVs. Smaller. Black sedan. It pulled up to the 3 vehicles on the shoulder, sat maybe 90 seconds, then left again going west. "What kind of sedan?" "I got a partial plate. Arizona. Registered to a fleet." He paused. fleet of Maricopa County. There it was. Chester Voss, or someone acting directly for Chester Voss, had driven out to that highway, met with the vehicles pursuing Ruth, delivered a new instruction, and driven back toward the county. A man in his position did not get close to operational situations. He did not appear in person near a highway outside Wickenburg on a wet night unless the stakes had exceeded what he was comfortable managing by phone. He had told them to wait, not to advance, to hold. The calculation was already clear to Boone. Voss was smart enough to know that an assault on a location where federal coordinates had been transmitted, where an active FBI case officer was on the phone, where any physical evidence of aggression would compound every other charge, by orders of magnitude was a worse outcome than retreating and fighting through legal channels. He was not withdrawing. He was repositioning, which was its own kind of information. Cody Boone said, "Stay on them. Don't lose sight. Not going anywhere." He went back inside. The upload was at 91%. Garth was in the corner, speaking into his personal phone in a low, rapid voice. Ruth was at the table watching the screen with the exact quality of attention she had been giving it since the upload began. The progress bar moved in small increments. 93. "They've stopped," Boone said. Garth looked up. "Stopped where?" "1.5 miles back on 89. All 3 vehicles on the shoulder." He paused. Voss sent someone. A county sedan came from the opposite direction. Stopped 90 seconds left, heading west. Whatever he said to them, they're holding position. Garth's face went through something and came out the other side without showing what happened in between. The calculation of a man running a sequence he had seen versions of before, arriving at the same conclusion from a different angle. "He pulled them back," Garth said. "Or redirected them." "Why now?" "Because the upload is almost done," Boone said. "And if Voss has any access to federal communications monitoring, even loose monitoring, he knows Strand made contact. So he knows the evidence is reaching federal hands. And he knows this becomes a different problem for him once that happens." Boone looked at the screen. 97%. A confrontation before the upload completes is one set of charges. A confrontation after is those charges plus obstruction of a federal investigation, plus anything else Strand decides to attach to it. "Smart," Garth said. "Not smart enough." 99. 100. The bar went green. Ruth closed her eyes. She held them closed for exactly 3 seconds. Boone counted. Then she opened them and looked at the screen and looked at the drive in her palm, which she had been holding in her left hand throughout the entire upload, without loosening her grip on it. And she looked at it now, with an expression that was not triumph and was not relief. Something older and harder than both of those things. The expression of a person who has been carrying weight for so long that the absence of it has a shape, and the shape is unexpected and requires a moment to understand. "Is it there?" she said. Garth checked the screen, checked the phone in his other hand where a confirmation from Strand's secure channel had just appeared. "It's there," he said. She looked at the drive in her palm. She held it for a moment more. Then she said Edwin's name, quietly. Not to Boone and not to Garth, just to the room. The way you say something when you need it to have been said, regardless of who hears it. Nobody spoke. Then Strand's voice came back through the speaker. "Mrs. Callahan, I have the files. My team is processing them. I have 2 agents approximately 22 minutes from your location. They will take you to a secure facility tonight." She stopped. What you have delivered tonight, the scope of it, the documentation, the chain of custody your husband established. This is not a small thing. He was an important man, Ruth said. Yes. Strand's voice was quieter now. He was. Boone moved to the window. On the highway, Cody's surveillance indicated Voss's vehicles had not moved from the shoulder. Holding. Waiting. The calculation running in a county building or a car somewhere west of here. His phone buzzed. Cody. A message this time. 4 words. They're leaving. Going west. Boone looked at the message for a long moment. Then he looked up and said it. They're gone. Garth straightened. All 3. All 3. Heading west. He turned it over. The upload was complete, but Voss's people could not know that yet unless Strand's office had transmitted a confirmation through a channel that was being monitored. Which was exactly the kind of thing that a man with Chester Voss's access and resources would have arranged. Strand Boone said toward the phone, Yes. Did your office send any communication in the last 5 minutes that could have been picked up on a monitored channel? A pause. We sent a secure acknowledgement to this location. How secure? Another pause. Longer this time. Theoretically unmonitored, she said. But if Voss has compromised federal communications infrastructure at any level, even partial, he knows the upload is done, Boone said. And he knows federal presence is inbound. Yes. Garth was already nodding. The same calculation. Voss had made exactly the decision Boone had expected. Cut the exposure. Retreat to ground where lawyers and procedure and the complications of evidence challenges were his tools instead of his liabilities. Men who had built careers on insulating themselves from direct consequence knew how to make consequence arrive slowly, and through channels rather than fast, and through confrontation. It was the smart move. It was also not the end. Boone looked at Ruth. She was watching him with the steady knowing expression of a woman who had arrived at the same conclusion a few seconds before he had finished articulating it. This isn't over, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Boone said. But it started. And starting was the part that almost didn't happen. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression that was not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was somewhere in it. Something older and quieter than that word usually carried. The expression of a person who has been living inside a very long story and has just reached the point where the story becomes something other than only loss. Outside, somewhere on the access road, the first pair of federal headlights appeared through the ranch building's single window, moving at the specific speed of people who knew the crisis had passed its worst point, but understood that careful still mattered. Garth moved toward the door. That'll be Strand's people, he said. Boone stayed where he was. Ruth stayed where she was, both of them looking at that approaching light without speaking, because there was a quality to the moment that required silence. The specific, exhausted, bone-deep stillness of something that had been pressing forward against resistance for a very long time and has finally reached a place where it is allowed to stop. A man who had spent 8 months building the truth. A woman who had spent 14 months carrying it. One night on a wet Arizona highway where the truth had finally irrevocably broken into the open. The federal agents knocked twice. Garth opened the door. 2 federal agents stepped through. A man and a woman, both in their 30s, both carrying the specific economy of movement that comes from years of walking into rooms where something bad has already happened, and something worse might still. They moved without urgency, but without wasted motion. Either the way people move when they have been trained to read a situation, in the first 5 seconds, and have read this one accurately. The woman introduced herself as Torres. The man said nothing. He positioned himself just inside the door and kept his eyes moving across the room in a slow, methodical sweep. Cataloging, assessing, not settling anywhere in particular. Torres looked at Ruth with the particular quality of attention that professionals give to people they have been briefed on. Recognition without familiarity. The respect of someone who knows the relevant facts and has already formed a considered opinion based on them. Mrs. Callahan. Agent Strand sends her regards. She paused. Are you injured? I'm tired, Ruth said, which is different. Torres almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. We have a vehicle outside. We'd like to get you to the Phoenix field office tonight if you're able. I'm able. Ruth stood from the table. She straightened Cody's jacket across her shoulders with the small, precise gesture of a woman adjusting a blazer before stepping into a meeting. She looked at Boone and then at Garth. And there was a moment, brief and without ceremony, the way the most important moments almost always are, where she simply looked at both of them and let that be sufficient. Then she looked back at Torres. There's one thing before we leave, she said. Torres waited. My son, Owen. He lives in Denver. His phone may have been monitored. He does not know what happened tonight, and he has been awake since this morning waiting. I need to reach him through a clean line. Torres reached into her jacket without hesitation and produced a phone. Use this. It's clean. Ruth took it with both hands. She looked at it for a moment. Then she dialed without pausing the number coming to her the way numbers come to people who have been calling them for decades. Not from memory, but from something deeper than memory. It rang twice. The voice that answered carried the specific exhaustion of someone who has not slept and will not sleep until this call arrives. Not frantic, not angry, just worn thin by the hours of not knowing the way a rope wears thin under sustained tension. Mom. I'm all right, Owen. Ruth's voice was level and quiet. I'm safe. I'm with federal agents. A sound came through the phone that was not quite a word. More like the release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. The sound a thing makes when the tension that was containing it is finally removed. Mom. His voice worked to reassemble itself. I called your phone this morning and it went straight to nothing, and I didn't know if... I know. Ruth looked at the surface of the table in front of her. I'll explain everything. Not tonight, but everything. She paused. Are you all right? A short sound. Something between a laugh and its opposite. Am I all right? Mom. Owen. Yes. His voice pulled itself together one more time, finding the steadiness that had always been in it somewhere underneath. I'm all right. Are you really safe? Truly. Truly, Ruth said. The word carried the full weight of what it had cost to be able to say it. Not as a reassurance, as a fact that had been earned through 2 days of running and 51 years of marriage to a man who had taught her that words meant exactly what you chose to make them mean, and nothing less. Go to sleep, she said. I'll call you in the morning. She handed the phone back to Torres. Her hands, for the first time in the entire duration of this night, were not perfectly still. There was a fine tremor in them that she made no attempt to conceal or correct. Not the trembling of fear, the trembling of something finally released. The way a hand shakes when it has been clenched for so long that opening it requires deliberate effort. and the muscles remember the holding even after the holding is done. Torres waited with the patience of someone who knew exactly what she was witnessing and understood that it required space rather than management. Boone watched and said nothing. Ruth set her hands flat on the table for a moment. Then she stood fully. She turned to Boone. "Thank you," she said. It was not the performed gratitude of a person executing a social obligation. It was the directness of someone saying a thing they mean completely without decoration, because decoration would only reduce it. Boone looked at her. "You did the hard part," he said. 14 months of it. You did the part that made everything else possible." She looked at him steadily. "Don't minimize what you did tonight." He didn't argue with her. He had learned over the course of the last several hours that arguing with Ruth Callahan about a matter she had settled in her own mind was an exercise with a predetermined outcome, and he had no particular interest in outcomes he had already seen coming. Torres moved them gently toward the door, the professional, unhurried manner of someone who understood that urgency existed, but that panic did not serve it. Garth held the door. Outside, the night had gone quiet in the particular way of Arizona after a storm has moved through. The rain entirely finished. The air clean and cold and vast. The kind of air that comes when a sky has been emptied out and refilled with something new. The stars were coming back in the southwest, the cloud cover breaking apart and retreating. Ruth stopped at the threshold. She turned and looked at Boone one final time. The operational clarity that had carried her through the night was still there. It would probably be there for a while yet, he thought. The body kept running on what it had been running on long after the immediate necessity had passed. But behind it now, visible in a way it had not been inside the diner or the truck or the ranch building, was something else. The face of a woman who had just survived something she had not been entirely certain she would survive, and was allowing herself for exactly one moment to know it. "He would have wanted to thank you himself," she said. Boone understood immediately who she meant. He was quiet for a second. He did the work he said. 8 months of it alone because he believed accuracy was a form of respect. He paused. "I just moved it down the road." She held his eyes. "That's all any of us can do," she said. Then Torres guided her forward, and the door of the federal vehicle closed and the engine started, and the headlights came on and the car moved down the access road toward the gate, at the unhurried pace of people who knew the worst was past, but understood that careful still mattered. The taillights disappeared around the first bend in the road. The sound of the engine faded. Garth stood beside Boone in the doorway, both of them listening to it go. "She's going to be all right," Garth said. It was not a question. "Yes," Boone said. "She is." They stood in the quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes after something has been completed, and the noise that had been filling the space around it is gone, and what remains is simply what was always there underneath. "Voss isn't done," Garth said. "No. Men like that, when they lose the opening engagement, they don't fold. They regroup. They get lawyers. They start working the procedural angles. Chain of custody challenges, admissibility questions, anything that can create delay." Garth's voice was flat and factual. The voice of a man who had watched this exact pattern before and carried a specific permanent anger about it that he had learned to speak about without demonstrating. "It could take years," Boone said. "It will take years. You okay with that?" Boone considered the question. He thought about Ruth's hands on the table in that ranch building, and the way she had said Edwin's name into the empty room when the upload bar went green, and the way she had walked across the floor of Harlan's diner toward the man that everyone else in the room had already decided was something to be avoided. What Voss does next, Boone said, is not my department. Getting her to the point where she could hand it over. That was my department. He paused. She got it there. That's what counts. Garth nodded slowly. Strand's good, he said. If anyone can hold it together through a long legal fight, it's her. Boone did not respond to that. He was looking at the road that led back to the gate, thinking about something else. Something that had been sitting in the back of his mind since Cody's message arrived, telling him the vehicles had gone west. The calculation Chester Voss had made standing on that highway shoulder in the rain, the 90-second conversation, the decision to pull back. A man like Voss did not make a decision that looked like retreat and intend it as retreat. He made a decision that looked like retreat, because the next position was already prepared and waiting. Boone pulled out his phone and typed 3 words to Cody. Stay in state. The reply came back in 9 seconds. Already planned on it. He put the phone away. Garth was watching him. Your people staying close, he said. Some of them. Boone looked down the dark road. She's going to Phoenix. We've got members in Phoenix. Garth was quiet for a moment. That's not something the Hells Angels usually do. Not for outsiders. The club does what the situation calls for. Boone said it simply, not defensively. This situation calls for it. Garth absorbed this. Then he said something he had clearly not planned to say. Something that came up from a different register than the one he had been operating in all night. You know what I thought when you called me, he said, before I knew anything about what this was. He stopped, considered how to continue. I thought Garth Dillon getting a call from Boone Haskell at 11 at night from a road in the desert means someone is in serious trouble. He paused. And then I thought whoever that someone is, they picked the right person. He looked at Boone. I was right. Boone looked at him for a moment. I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done, maybe Garth said. But I wasn't there. He moved back inside. Coffee's on. You want some before you ride? Boone looked at his watch. 1:15. He thought about the highway ahead of him, the long, dark miles back toward Prescott, where the chapter was staging, the cold air and the wet road, and the particular sensation of forward motion that had always been for him the closest available substitute for resolution. The way the engine took the road's problems and converted them into something manageable. The way the miles behind you became for the duration of the ride exactly that. Behind you. Yeah, he said. I'll take some coffee. They sat at the folding table for 20 minutes. 2 men who had known each other across the specific geography of mutual obligation and shared history that exists between people who have been in serious situations together and have not used each other badly in the process. They drank coffee and said relatively little. Garth told him that Strand had already initiated a formal request to bypass county and state law enforcement channels on the Callahan matter, entirely citing documented evidence of command-level compromise. That had taken her approximately 35 minutes from the moment Ruth had said Chester Voss's name. Boone thought about those 35 minutes. A federal agent awake past midnight, moving quickly and deliberately through institutional processes on behalf of a woman she had never met on the basis of a phone call, and a drive full of evidence compiled by a man who had been dead for 14 months. Moving carefully and without announcement because the system those processes were embedded in had already shown it could not be trusted at certain levels. He was almost done with his coffee when his phone buzzed. A number he did not recognize. He looked at it for a moment, let it ring twice, then picked up. Haskell, a woman's voice, said, controlled familiar from the earlier call. This is Strand. He set the mug down. Mrs. Callahan is en route, Strand said. She's safe. I wanted you to know that directly. He said nothing. I also wanted to tell you something directly. Strand continued, rather than through Mr. Dillon. Another pause, slightly shorter. What you did tonight. Getting her out, getting her to a secure location. Keeping that upload running. None of that was your responsibility. None of it was your obligation. You had every reasonable basis for finishing your coffee and getting back on the road. She stopped. A lot of people would have. Boone looked at his coffee mug. She walked toward me, he said, in a room where everyone else looked away. That's not something you just let be. Strand was quiet on the other end of the line. No, she said, finally. I suppose it isn't. A pause. There's one more thing, she said. And I'm telling you directly because you should understand the full scope of what happened tonight. He waited. The attorney Mrs. Callahan mailed the backup copy to. His name is Herbert Mace. We've been trying to reach him since she mentioned him earlier tonight. We reached his office 40 minutes ago. She paused. Mr. Mace was in a car accident 2 weeks ago. He's been in a rehabilitation facility since. The documents he received from Mrs. Callahan were held in his office during his absence. When his staff went to retrieve them tonight at our request, they found the office had been broken into sometime in the last 72 hours. The documents are gone. The ranch building kitchen was very quiet. Boone looked at the table in front of him, the grain of the wood, the coffee mug, the lamplight on the wall. He thought about what this meant in the sequence of what he knew. The drive was in federal hands. The uploaded files were on secure servers. Those were safe. But the second copy, the physical documents Ruth had mailed believing they would survive independently, had been intercepted. Which meant Chester Voss's operation had been moving on multiple fronts simultaneously, and had been doing so with a level of reach and coordination that was considerably deeper than anything that had shown itself tonight. Which meant Edwin Callahan had been right about all of it, and it had cost him everything. She believed in Edwin's system, Boone said. He told her to keep a copy in the shoe. She kept it. Strand was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. She never knew that copy was already gone, that what she was carrying in her shoe was the only surviving documentation of everything her husband spent 8 months building. Boone sat with that for a moment. He thought about 2 days of running. Cash only. Phone off since Flagstaff. 4 miles on foot to avoid a checkpoint she had decided she could not trust. An 89-year-old woman who believed she had a safety net, and had in fact had none since before she started running. Who had walked into a roadside diner on a wet night and looked around the room at every available option and walked toward the one that everyone else had already written off. The chain of faith between a dead man's instruction and a living woman's compliance had been the single thread connecting everything he had done to the place where it could finally matter. Is she gonna be told? Boone said. When she's rested. When she's settled. A pause. It won't change what she did tonight. But she should know how close it was. She already knows how close it was, Boone said. She's known since the first day. Strand said nothing to that. Mr. Haskell? Her voice shifted register slightly. I'm going to say something that falls outside my usual professional vocabulary, so bear with me. He waited. What you did tonight was not your job. It was not your responsibility. It did not have to be you. And the fact that it was you and that you stayed with it from beginning to end matters in a way that I want to say plainly rather than leaving it implied. Boone looked at his coffee mug for a long moment. She walked toward me, he said, in a room where everyone else looked away. That's the whole of it. Strand was quiet. Get some rest, Mr. Haskell, she said. And thank you. The line went dead. Garth was looking at him from across the table. He had heard enough of one side of the conversation to read the shape of it. Mace's copies are gone, Garth said. It was not a question. Yes. Garth absorbed this with the stillness of a man who has processed bad news often enough to have developed a methodology for it. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. She made it through anyway. She made it through anyway, Boone said. He stood. He picked up his helmet from the counter where he had set it when they came in and held it in both hands for a moment. The familiar weight and shape of it. The small scratches on the left side from a low side on a gravel road outside Flagstaff 4 years ago. The things you carry that hold the evidence of the road you have actually been on rather than the road you intended. He reached into the left breast pocket of his cut. The Timex was there. Always there. The weight of it against his ribs, exactly what it always was. He took it out, held it in his palm in the lamplight of the ranch building kitchen. The scratched crystal. The stopped hands. The date window showing a date from 3 years after the last time the battery had been replaced, and the watch had still been ticking. And Danny had still been wearing it on his wrist at 19 years old. Boone looked at it for a long time. He thought about what Lyle had said in Harlan's diner. The boy wouldn't want you mixed up in this. The calculation behind those words. The specific, deliberate cruelty of using a dead young man as a lever. The research that had gone into knowing which name to say and in which tone to say it. The assumption that the weight of that name would be the thing that broke Boone's willingness to stand where he was standing. They had been wrong about what the weight meant. The weight of the watch in his hand was not the weight of paralysis. It was not the weight of guilt that bent you toward the door when a room got dangerous. It was the weight of a person who had been 19 years old and gone too early, and had never in all the years Boone had known him looked the other way when someone needed something. That was who Danny had been. That was who Boone had been trying in his imperfect and ongoing way to be in the years since. He looked at the watch one more time. Then he clenched his hand around it. Then he put it back in his pocket right against his ribs, where he could feel it when he breathed. He looked at Garth. The favor, he said. Consider it settled. Garth looked at him. Something moved through Garth Dillon's expression. That was not sentiment and not detachment, but occupied the honest ground between the two. The expression of a man who had been in enough situations to know when a thing had been completed properly. The favor I owed you, Garth said carefully, was for what you did for my daughter's situation 3 years ago. That was a different debt. He paused. Tonight you came to me. Tonight we're even on something new. He paused again. Don't make it transactional. It doesn't suit either of us. Boone looked at him for a moment. Then he put his hand out. Garth took it. They shook once firmly in the manner of men who are communicating something that neither of them is going to put into words, because putting it into words would reduce it. And they both know that, and they are both fine with knowing it. Then Boone walked out into the Arizona night. Cody was on the access road, alone. His Harley parked, his arms folded, his helmet on the tank. When Boone came through the door, he simply watched him walk to the bike and check it over and put his helmet on. the comfortable silence of someone who does not need to fill space with noise. "She get out. Safe," Cody said. "Federal custody. Phoenix Field Office." "Good." Cody picked up his helmet. "Chapter's in Prescott tonight," he said. "You coming?" Boone swung onto the bike, sat for a moment with his hands on the bars, feeling the familiar geometry of it. The weight forward and down. The balance that was not balance exactly, but the management of competing forces held in constant negotiation by the contact between rubber and road. The potential energy of a machine at rest that knew what it was for. He thought about the highway ahead. He thought about Prescott, and the chapter and the particular quality of a room full of people who had been riding together long enough to know each other, in the way you know people when you have seen them make decisions under pressure. And the decisions they made were the ones you would have made. He thought about Ruth Callahan in a federal vehicle moving through the Arizona dark toward Phoenix, toward a field office where the evidence her husband had built would spend the next several hours becoming something that could not be undone. He thought about Edwin Callahan, who had spent 8 months building that evidence alone without telling anyone, checking and rechecking, because he believed that accuracy was a form of respect, who had gone to the wrong person with the right information and had been dead 11 weeks later, and whose work had survived him because he had believed in redundancy, and his wife had believed in him. He thought about a room full of people looking away, and an old woman who had stood up anyway. He thought about Danny, 19 years old, a Timex watch with a stop battery, the weight of it against his ribs steady and familiar, the way all the things you carry eventually become simply part of the weight you are always moving with and through. The weight of saying yes. "Yeah," Boone said. "I'm coming." He started the engine. The sound of it rolled out across the quiet post-storm dark and bounced off the low hills to the north, and then dissolved into the enormous Arizona sky, which was clear now, from horizon to horizon. The last of the clouds gone east with the storm. The stars back in full and very bright. The way they are after rain has washed the air clean of everything that was obscuring them. Cody started his bike a half-second later. Together, they moved down the access road toward the gate. Boone hit the combination without stopping the numbers already in his hands. From the first time. 6421. The lock opened. He drove through and pulled left onto the gravel county road and then right again onto the main road heading north. He did not look back at the ranch building. The gate swung shut behind them. The highway appeared, and he took it without slowing the tires moving from gravel to pavement, in the specific way that pavement always felt like something settling after the unpredictability of gravel, like the road making a decision. He opened the throttle. The engine answered the way it always answered. Not a metaphor for anything, just the sound of a machine doing what it was built to do, which was move forward, which was the only direction available. Behind him somewhere a gate had swung shut on a night that would not be forgotten by any person who had lived it. Ahead of him somewhere Prescott, and the chapter and the sound of engines and men who would not ask where he had been, because some nights answered their own questions, and the answers were visible in the way a person came through the door. And somewhere south of him, moving through the desert, dark toward Phoenix, a woman was telling the truth one final time to the people who finally had the authority and the will to do something with it. The truth her husband had spent 8 months building. The truth she had spent 14 months carrying. The truth that was supposed to have been stopped at every stage and had not been stopped because one man had believed that accuracy was a form of respect, and one woman had believed in that man. And one night in a roadside diner on Route 89, The only person in the room who had not looked away was a biker who had stopped for coffee and apple pie and had nowhere else to be. None of them had planned any of this. Not the man who wanted coffee and had 11 hours of road in his bones and kept a dead boy's watch in his pocket on the anniversary of losing him. Not the former federal agent who still answered calls at midnight because some habits did not stop when the badge went into a drawer. Not the FBI agent in Phoenix who had picked up on the second ring because the situation warranted it, and she was the kind of person who understood when a situation warranted it. Not the rider who had come out of the dark on a service road with his headlights off and handed over his jacket without being asked. They had simply been the people who were there, and they had chosen each in their own way, without announcement or agreement, to do the thing the moment required. That is the truth about what happens on the nights that matter. The nights do not arrive with instructions. They arrive in the middle of ordinary things in roadside diners and ranch buildings and unmarked access roads, wearing whatever they happen to be wearing, equipped with whatever is available. They ask their question without warning, and the question is always the same, and the answer is always the same. And the answer is simply this: you either stay or you don't. Edwin Callahan had known that. He had proved it with 8 months of meticulous and solitary work, and he had paid for it with his life, and his wife had carried what he built because she had trusted him. And that trust had been the thing that held everything together when everything else had been stripped away. And on a wet night in Arizona in a diner called Harlan's on Route 89, that trust had finally made it to the other side. Cody held his position a half bike length behind. On the left, the second headlight moving in the same rhythm as Boone's, the two of them falling into the automatic formation of riders who have covered enough road together to do it without thinking about it. The wind came off the desert clean and cold and smelled like wet sage and open space, and the particular freshness of air that has been washed all the way through. The highway ran straight ahead, and Boone ran with it, the engine steady beneath him, the stars very clear above the road, unreeling in the headlight, like something being revealed rather than consumed. The watch in his pocket, the road in front, everything else exactly where it needed to be. He did not slow down.